My stepmom manipulated my dad into kicking me out. Now he's begging me for help. I lost my mom when I was 9 years old. It was sudden and devastating, and for a long time, it felt like my entire world had shattered. My dad, Mark, 44M, did his best to keep everything together, but he was never the same after she passed. He went through a series of relationships over the years, some lasting a few months, others a bit longer, but none of them ever felt permanent, until Heather, 30F, came into the picture. I was 16 when my dad started dating Heather. She was only 8 years older than me, which immediately made the situation feel awkward. Within a few months, she moved into our home, and from the very start, it was clear that she wanted to establish herself as the dominant figure in the household. But the first real red flag came when she told me, no, demanded, that I call her mom. To say I was uncomfortable with that would be an understatement. She had been dating my dad for less than a year, and I was still struggling with the loss of my real mother. I wasn't ready to accept anyone new in that role, let alone someone who was closer to being an older sister than a maternal figure. I refused as politely as I could, explaining that I wasn't comfortable with it and that it felt wrong to me. That's when everything changed. Heather took my refusal personally, almost as if I had insulted her. From that moment on, she either ignored me completely or treated me like I was a problem she had to deal with. I could feel the shift immediately. Before that, she had at least pretended to be friendly, but now, it was clear that she resented me. She would act cold and distant, or worse, she would find ways to criticize everything I did. My dad, blinded by his love for her, either didn't notice or chose to ignore the way she treated me. At first, I tried to brush it off. I figured that if I just kept my head down and avoided unnecessary conflict, things would eventually smooth over. But Heather didn't let that happen. She started inserting herself into every part of my life, trying to control things she had no business being involved in. How I spent my free time, who I hung out with, even what I ate. She treated me like a child, despite the fact that I was already independent in many ways. The worst part was how she manipulated my dad. Whenever I pushed back against her overreach, she would turn around and play the victim. She'd tell my dad that I was being disrespectful, that I wasn't giving her a fair chance, that I was making her feel unwelcome in her own home. My dad, desperate to keep the peace, would side with her every time. It was frustrating, but I tried to believe that he was just trying to make his marriage work. As time went on, it became clear that Heather wasn't just trying to be part of the family. She wanted to erase my mother's memory entirely. She would rearrange things in the house, pushing my mom's belongings into storage, removing photos, and even trying to replace old traditions with her own. It felt like she wanted to rewrite history, and I wasn't having it. I knew from early on that we would never have a real mother-son relationship, but I had hoped we could at least be civil. Heather had no interest in that. Instead, she saw me as an obstacle, something standing between her and complete control of the household. And over time, I started to realize that my father was letting her win. When my dad and Heather officially got married, I thought that maybe things would settle down. I wasn't expecting a miraculous turnaround in our relationship, but I hoped that now that she had what she wanted, a ring, a house, and my father's devotion, she would finally back off and stop obsessing over me. I was wrong. If anything, the marriage only made things worse. My dad became even more absorbed in his new wife, spending all his free time with her and barely acknowledging me. At first, I tried to be understanding. Newlyweds are supposed to be wrapped up in each other, right? But after a while, it became obvious that it wasn't just about them being happy together. Heather was making sure there was no space left for me in his life. She played the long game, slowly poisoning my dad against me. She convinced him that I was the one refusing to accept her, that I was cold and distant, that I was disrespecting their marriage. And the worst part? He believed her. Little things started to change. My dad would forget about plans we'd made, ignore my messages, or cancel last minute because Heather needed him. Whenever I tried to talk to him, Heather would always find a way to insert herself into the conversation, as if she couldn't stand the idea of us having a moment alone. When I confronted him about it, he brushed me off, saying that I was being too sensitive and that Heather was just trying to make things work. But I could see what was really happening. Every time Heather and I had even the smallest disagreement, she would twist it into something much bigger when she reported it to my dad. If I didn't answer her right away when she asked me something, she'd tell him I was ignoring her. If I disagreed with her about anything, she'd tell him I was being aggressive. If I avoided her altogether, she'd tell him I was being immature and making things difficult for no reason. And my dad, instead of standing up for me, or even considering that maybe Heather wasn't the saint he thought she was, started pulling away. I became an afterthought, someone who lived under the same roof, but wasn't really part of his life anymore. Things hit a breaking point when I came home from college for a weekend visit. I had been away for months, buried in coursework, and I was excited to see my dad. I expected him to be happy that I had made the effort to come home. Instead, when I walked through the door, I was met with a look of annoyance. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone flat. I hesitated. I thought I'd come home for the weekend. Just wanted to see you." He let out a sigh, rubbing his temples. "Well, great. Now I have to cancel dinner plans with Heather." I just stood there, dumbfounded. It wasn't, "Hey, it's great to see you," or "I missed you, son." It was, "You're an inconvenience." Like my presence was a problem he had to deal with. At that moment, I realized something that had been creeping up on me for years. I wasn't part of my dad's life anymore. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me that I stood there, stunned, as my father sighed about canceling his dinner plans. It felt like a slap in the face, like my presence wasn't just unwanted, but a burden. I had spent years trying to hold on to the bond we once had, convincing myself that deep down he still cared. But in that moment, the truth was painfully clear. I was an outsider in my own home. Something inside me snapped. "That's it?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "I come home to see you, and all you care about is your stupid dinner plans?" My father's expression hardened. "Watch your tone," he warned. I let out a bitter laugh. "My tone? Are you serious? You don't even care that I'm here. All you care about is her. Do you even realize what she's been doing this whole time? She's been playing you, turning you against me, making me the bad guy, so she can have you all to herself." His face twisted in anger. "Enough," he snapped. "I don't want to hear any more of your lies. Julia has done nothing but try to include you in this family, and you've rejected her at every turn. You've been the one creating problems, not her." I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. "Are you even listening to yourself? She hates me. She's been trying to get rid of me since day one. And you just let it happen. You've pushed me aside for her, Dad. And now you don't even care that I see it." He took a step closer, his eyes burning with frustration. "You have never given her a chance. You've been selfish and disrespectful since the beginning, and I'm done with it." His voice dropped, low and firm. "Either you start treating Julia with the respect she deserves and call her mom, or you're out of this house." I stared at him, my stomach twisting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wasn't just choosing Julia over me. He was demanding that I erase my own mother from my life to make her happy. And that wasn't going to happen. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even try to reason with him. Instead, I took a deep breath, turned on my heel, and walked straight to my room. I packed my bags in silence, stuffing in clothes, my laptop, anything that mattered. I didn't take everything. I wasn't about to stick around long enough to pack neatly. As I zipped up my suitcase, I realized that this was it. My father had given me a choice, and in doing so, he had made his choice. And it wasn't me. I walked back downstairs, my bags slung over my shoulders. My father stood in the hallway, arms crossed, as if waiting for me to change my mind. I met his gaze, my voice steady. "I won't ever call her mom, and I won't ever respect someone who spent years trying to ruin my life." For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker in his eyes. But he didn't stop me. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. I had nowhere to go, but I knew exactly who I could turn to. That night, I showed up at my uncle's house, my mom's older brother, the only person in my family who had always been on my side. He opened the door and took one look at my bags before sighing. "He finally did it," he muttered, shaking his head. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah." Without another word, he stepped aside and let me in. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Living with my uncle was a drastic change, but one that I desperately needed. From the moment I stepped into his home, he made it clear that I wasn't alone, that I had someone who actually cared about me. You're not going back there, he told me firmly. Not unless he wakes up and realizes what he's done. And knowing your father, that's not happening anytime soon. At first, it was overwhelming. I had been kicked out of my own home, disowned by my own father, all because I refused to bend to Julia's manipulation. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I was finally free. No more walking on eggshells. No more waiting for my father to remember I existed. No more her. My uncle didn't just give me a roof over my head. He gave me a future. He covered my tuition, helped me find a stable place to live, and even supported me financially while I was in school. You focus on your education, he said. I've got the rest covered. For the first time in years, I had security. I didn't have to prove myself to anyone. I didn't have to fight for someone's love or approval. I could just be. Word of what happened spread fast. My uncle wasn't one to stay quiet about injustice. And once he found out the full story, he told everyone, not just my mother's side of the family, but my father's as well. And they weren't happy. My grandparents, aunts, uncles, and even some cousins completely cut ties with my father. He kicked his own son out for her, my grandmother had said in disbelief. Over a woman he's only known for a few years? Unbelievable. No one wanted anything to do with him after that. From what I heard, they had tried to talk some sense into him, but he refused to listen, claiming I was the one who had betrayed him. If he's going to pick Julia over his own child, my uncle told me, then he can live with the consequences. And he did. For the next 6 years, my father and Julia were completely isolated. No family gatherings, no birthday calls, no support. The only person my father had left was her, and he didn't seem to care. Those 6 years without him were the best thing that could have happened to me. I worked hard, focused on my studies, and graduated with a degree in business. With my uncle's help, I landed a solid job in real estate, got my license, and started my career. Financially, I was doing better than ever. I was able to move into my own place, in a much better neighborhood, and even started paying my uncle back, though he kept insisting I didn't have to. I didn't help you expecting anything in return, he reminded me. I did it because you deserved better. Still, I wanted to repay him. Not just for the money, but for being there when no one else was. In all that time, my father never once reached out. Not a call, not a text, nothing. It was as if I had never existed to him. And for a while, that hurt. I kept wondering if he regretted what he did, if he ever missed me, if maybe, just maybe, one day, he'd wake up and realize what he lost. But as the years passed, I stopped waiting. I stopped hoping. I didn't need him anymore. I had built a life for myself without him. I had a job, financial stability, and the support of the family members who actually cared. And that was more than enough. For 6 years, I had lived my life without a single word from my father. No birthday calls, no apologies, not even a half-hearted message to check if I was still alive. As far as I was concerned, he had made his choice. He picked Julia over me, and I had moved on. Then, out of nowhere, he showed up at my door. It was late in the evening when I heard the knock. At first, I thought it was a neighbor or maybe a delivery mix-up. But when I opened the door, there he was, looking exhausted, older, and completely worn down by life. I just stood there staring at him. For a second, I thought maybe he was finally here to apologize. That maybe after all these years, he'd finally realized what he had done. I should have known better. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tired, almost desperate. I didn't invite him in. I didn't even move. I just folded my arms and waited. If he wanted something, he could just say it. That he wasted no time getting to the point. Julia had given birth 6 months ago, and not long after, she had been in a car accident. Apparently, she had one too many drinks at lunch with her friends and totaled her car on the way home. She's lucky she didn't kill herself or someone else, my father admitted. But she's not okay. She can't move much, and she needs full-time care. I nodded, waiting for him to get to the part that involved me. I already had a feeling where this was going. Turns out, life hadn't been easy for them. Right after Julia found out she was pregnant, my father's business started tanking. Then the pandemic hit, and things got even worse. Julia, of course, never worked a day in her life, so everything was on his shoulders. They barely scraped by, but after her accident, things collapsed completely. They had medical bills. Julia needed constant care. And worst of all, they had no one to help them. Her parents had been babysitting for a while, But they had their own lives and eventually told my dad they couldn't be full-time caretakers. That led to a fight, and now they weren't speaking to him. With no money, no help, and no one left to turn to, he came to me. "I just need some help," he said, looking at me like I was his last hope. "You don't even have to talk to Julia. I don't know what to do. I have no one else." I couldn't help but laugh. No one else? The irony was unreal. For years, I begged him to listen to me, to see what Julia was doing, to believe that she was manipulating him. And now, when she was finally out of commission, suddenly I was important again? He chose this. He chose her over me. And now, 6 years later, he expected me to step in and clean up the mess? I shook my head. "I'm not your backup plan, Dad. You made your choice." He blinked like he couldn't believe what I was saying. "I was wrong, okay? I made mistakes, but this is your family. Your little brother." I cut him off. "That's your son, not mine. I don't owe you anything." He tried everything, guilt-tripping, pleading, even getting angry when I refused. But I wasn't budging. I told him he should leave before I made him leave. His face twisted with frustration, and for a moment, I saw the man who had kicked me out all those years ago. "You're really just going to turn your back on your family?" he snapped. "After everything I did for you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Everything you did for me? You threw me out like garbage. Now you expect me to be your savior." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but I was done. "I'm not helping you," I said firmly. "Not now. Not ever. You made your bed. Now lie in it." And with that, I shut the door in his face. After I shut the door in his face, I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. Instead of leaving, my father knocked again. And again. And again. I ignored him at first, thinking he'd get the message and leave. But after 10 minutes of persistent knocking, I sighed and opened the door again. Only because I didn't want my neighbors to start complaining. "What part of no did you not understand?" I asked, crossing my arms. He looked frustrated, almost panicked. "You're being unreasonable," he said. "I am your father. I know I made mistakes, but I need you to step up now. Be the bigger person." I scoffed. "The bigger person?" The bigger person doesn't throw their kid out over some manipulative woman. The bigger person doesn't ignore their child for 6 years. And now he had the audacity to act like I was the one in the wrong? "No," I said flatly. "I don't owe you anything. And I definitely don't owe Julia anything. You made your choice. I don't care if you regret it now." He ran a hand through his graying hair, his frustration growing. "Look, I know you're still mad about what happened, but you don't understand. This is family. Julia and I were struggling, and there's a baby involved. Your little brother. You're really going to turn your back on him?" I just shook my head. "Don't drag the kid into this. He's not my responsibility." "But you're his brother," he shot back. "You. I'm not his brother," I interrupted. "I don't even know him, and I never will, because I have no intention of being a part of your life. You made it clear I wasn't family when you kicked me out. So why should I care about yours now?" That hit a nerve. His expression twisted with anger. "I raised you," he snapped. "I gave you a roof over your head, food, clothes, and now you think you can just cut me off when I need you the most." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, you raised me. Then you threw me out like trash the second your wife decided I wasn't part of the picture. So don't stand here acting like you were some selfless father who did everything for me. You made your choice. Now you live with it." I could see the moment he realized I wasn't going to budge. His desperation shifted into fury. His jaw clenched, his hands curled in a fist at his sides, and his face darkened with rage. "You're a selfish, ungrateful little brat," he spat. "You always have been. Julia was right about you. You only care about yourself." I smirked, and yet, here you are, begging the selfish brat for help. That did it. He lost whatever control he had left. I can't believe I raised such a heartless. I held up a hand. "Save it." I cut him off. "You have exactly 30 seconds to leave, or I'm calling the cops." His eyes widened. "You wouldn't. Try me." For a moment, we just stood there, locked in a silent standoff. He was daring me to back down. I was daring him to push me further. He must have realized I wasn't bluffing because, after a long pause, he let out a bitter curse under his breath and finally turned to leave. "You're going to regret this," he muttered as he walked away. I didn't even bother responding. I just watched him disappear down the street, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind me. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. I thought that after I kicked him off my doorstep, I'd be done with him for good. I was wrong. It started with messages. I had blocked his number after his last visit, but somehow, he still found ways to get through. Different numbers, emails, even reaching out to a few of my friends. Each message was the same. Please, just talk to me. You don't understand what I'm going through. I made mistakes, but I need your help. I ignored every single one. Then, a few weeks later, I got a call from my uncle. He was laughing. "You won't believe what I just heard," he said. "Your father's finally getting a taste of his own medicine." Turns out, Julia had finally turned on him. The same woman he threw me away for. The same woman he defended for years. The same woman whose lies he believed over his own child. She had kicked him out of the house. Why? Because my father, desperate, broke, and unable to take care of their baby, had suggested putting the kid in foster care until they could get back on their feet. I wasn't even surprised. He had already proven before that he was willing to throw away his own blood if it got in the way of his relationship. Why would it be any different now? But Julia? Oh, she wasn't having that. Not when it came to her child. She went ballistic, apparently. Kicked him out. Told him she never wanted to see him again. Her parents backed her up, even helped her throw him out. Now he was bouncing between cheap motels, struggling to keep his business afloat, and completely alone. He had lost everything, and he still didn't think it was her fault. When my uncle told me all of this, I expected him to follow up with, "Your dad finally sees the truth," but nope. Even after everything, my father was still making excuses for Julia. "She's just overwhelmed," he apparently told a relative. She didn't mean it. She's under a lot of stress. Unbelievable. The woman lied about me, manipulated him into turning against his own son, made his life hell for years. And even after she destroyed him, he still refused to blame her. And that's when it finally hit me. It had never really been about her. Sure, she played a role, but in the end, it was his choices that led him here. He was the one who listened to her. He was the one who abandoned me. He was the one who let her manipulate him. This was all on him. After hearing all this, my uncle asked if I felt bad for him, if I was going to reach out. I didn't even have to think about my answer. No, I don't hate my father. I don't even wish bad things on him. But I also don't care what happens to him anymore. He made his choices. And now, for the first time, he was the one being abandoned. Poetic justice, if you ask me.